Okay, let's unpack this. Today, we're taking a deep dive into something really important for a lot of Californians, renters' rights, specifically after a wildfire hits your home.
Yeah, it's a tough situation.
Yeah.
Wildfires are just, well, part of living here for many, and figuring out housing afterwards, that's a whole other layer of stress.
Exactly. So to help make sense of it, we've looked through the source materials, legal guides, articles, stuff focused on tenant protections when fire messes with your rental. Our goal today is really to break down what these sources say you absolutely need to know, trying to bring some clarity to a really chaotic time.
Yeah, knowing your rights here, it's not just about legal stuff. It really gives you something solid to stand on when everything else feels uncertain.
Totally, a foundation.
Right.
Okay, so let's start with maybe the most basic thing. Habitability. Even after something like a wildfire, your landlord in California still has this core legal duty, right? To keep the property habitable.
That's fundamental. California Civil Code 1941.1 is the key reference there. The place has to be livable. And if a fire impacts that, the landlord is generally responsible for repairs.
And what counts as uninhabitable after a fire? It's not just if the building falls down, is it?
No, absolutely not. The source is pretty clear. It's broader. Think significant smoke or soot contamination, like throughout the unit.
Okay, smoke and soot.
Yeah, or damage to essential utilities, water, power, heat, structural damage, obviously, if it makes things unsafe, or even just destruction of doors, windows, things that keep the place secure.
And you mentioned smoke and soot specifically. That can be enough on its own.
It can, yes. The sources say that type of damage may qualify as a habitability issue the landlord has to deal with. They're responsible for fixing the property itself, and that includes, cleaning up ash and soot from the grounds if it affects your living space.
Okay, so the landlord has to fix it. Is there a set timeline? Like, do they have 30 days or something?
Well, not usually a hard number like that. The sources say they need to act promptly if the damage makes the unit unsafe or totally uninhabitable, like right away.
Okay, promptly for major issues.
Right. If it's partially damaged but you can still technically live there, they need to restore it to being fully habitable within a reasonable time frame. What's reasonable kind of depends on the situation, the extent of repairs needed.
And how do you make sure they actually do it? What's the key action for tenants?
Documentation. Always. Communicate with your landlord about the problems, the needed repairs, and do it in writing. Email, texts can work, but maybe certified mail for really important notices.
Get that paper trail.
Exactly. And take pictures, videos too. Document the damage thoroughly. Keep copies of absolutely everything, your requests, their responses, everything. It's your evidence.
That makes sense. Okay, moving from the physical side to the money side, paying rent. Does that obligation change after a fire?
Oh, definitely. It really hinges on how bad the damage is. The sources draw a pretty clear line. If your place becomes completely uninhabitable or it's totally destroyed, you generally have the right to stop paying rent immediately. Basically, the lease is considered terminated by the disaster. No more rent owed from that point.
What if you'd already paid for that month? Like the fire happens mid-month?
Good question. The landlord has to refund you for the days you couldn't live there because it was destroyed or uninhabitable. Prorated, basically.
Okay. And what about places that aren't destroyed but are like red tagged? I've heard that term.
Right. Red tag means officials have deemed it unsafe to occupy. If your home gets red tagged, you also don't owe rent until it's fixed and cleared for living again. And, importantly, you usually get a choice. You can end the lease, or you can wait for repairs and plan to move back.
So total loss or red tagged, no rent. But what if it's partial damage? Maybe one room's unusable or heavy smoke, but you can technically still live there.
That's the trickier one. If it's partially damaged but still livable, the general rule is yes, you still have to pay rent. But, and this is important, you might be entitled to a rent reduction.
Oh, okay. How does that work?
It should be proportional to the part of the unit you can't use. So if, say, a bedroom is unusable, you might argue for a reduction based on that lost space or function. You definitely need to request the repairs, and you should also discuss getting that reduced rent with the landlord while things aren't fully fixed.
And what if utilities are out? Like no power or water because of the fire's impact on the area?
That matters too. If essential utilities are out due to the disaster, the sources suggest that could also mean you don't have to pay rent, or at least not the full amount, depending on how long it lasts and how severe it is.
So again, communication is key. Document everything you discuss with the landlord about rent adjustments or stopping payments.
Absolutely. You need proof of those conversations and agreements.
Okay, let's talk security deposit. If a fire forces you out, what happens to that money? Is it protected?
Yes. California law specifically protects your security deposit here. If the fire damage makes your place unlivable and you have to terminate the lease and move out, the landlord has to return your deposit.
Is there a deadline for that?
Yes, usually within 21 days of when you officially move out.
And can they take money out of it to pay for the fire repairs?
No, absolutely not. As long as the fire wasn't, your fault through negligence or something deliberate, the sources are very clear. Landlords cannot deduct for repairing wildfire damage. Any deductions have to be for legitimate reasons unrelated to the fire itself, like maybe rent you owed before the fire or damage you caused that wasn't fire-related.
What if they try to keep it anyway or deduct for fire damage? What should you do?
First step, if you don't get it back or get a statement within 21 days, request an itemized list of any deductions. Then, if they've made improper deductions for fire damage, contest it in writing. Explain why it's wrong.
And if they still won't budge?
Then you should look into getting legal help. We'll talk more about resources later, but legal aid groups and tenant rights organizations are great for this. They can help you draft letters or even represent you. And ultimately, you can sue in small claims court to get the deposit back.
Seems like a hassle you don't need after a fire, but good to know the options there. The sources also mentioned trying to document the unit's condition before evacuating. That seems tough.
It is tough, absolutely. But if you happen to have recent photos or videos of the unit's condition before the fire, maybe on your phone from unrelated reasons, those can be incredibly helpful later to show what condition it was in. Even old photos can help establish a baseline.
Good tip. Okay, so let's say your place is damaged, maybe needs major repairs, and you have to move out temporarily. Who covers the hotel or the short-term rental? Does the landlord pay?
This is a point where state law might surprise people. Generally speaking, under California state law, landlords are not automatically required to pay for your temporary housing or relocation costs if a natural disaster like a wildfire makes your unit uninhabitable.
Really? So under state law, you could be out of your home and have to pay for somewhere else to stay yourself.
Under the basic state law, yes, that can be the situation. It feels harsh, but that's why understanding the other potential protections mentioned in the sources is so critical.
Okay, what are those other protections or exceptions?
Two main things stand out. First, local ordinances. Some cities or counties, especially those with rent control, do have rules that might require landlords to provide relocation assistance or cover some temporary housing costs.
Yeah.
This is more likely if the unit needs repairs but isn't totally destroyed. So step one is always check your local city or county rules.
Local laws can be stronger than state law here. Got it. What's the second thing?
Renter's insurance. The sources really hammer this home. It's often the main safety net for these kinds of costs.
How so?
Most standard policies have something called loss of use or additional living expenses coverage, ALE sometimes. This is specifically designed to cover costs like temporary rent, hotel bills, even extra food expenses if you can't cook, because your insured rental is uninhabitable due to a covered event like a fire.
So renter's insurance is really vital for covering that temporary displacement cost.
Hugely important. And then there's also potential government aid.
Like FEMA.
Exactly. FEMA can provide financial assistance for temporary housing and other essential needs if you're in a federally declared disaster area. And the Small Business Administration, the SBA, actually offers low-interest disaster loans to renters, not just homeowners, to help replace damaged personal property.
Okay, so the takeaway is keep every single receipt if you're displaced. Hotel, temporary rent, food, everything. You'll need them for insurance claims or applying for aid.
Absolutely critical. Documenting those expenses is key.
Let's shift to another big worry, eviction. Are there protections against your landlord trying to kick you out during or after a fire?
Yes, thankfully. California law does offer significant eviction protections, especially when there's a declared state of emergency, which is almost always the case with major wildfires.
What kinds of protections kick in?
Well, you might see temporary bans on evictions altogether, what they call moratoriums, or requirements for longer notice periods before a landlord can even start an eviction process. And crucially, protections against being evicted just because the fire impacted your home. And again, local rules can add even more protection.
So the landlord can't just use the fire as a convenient excuse to get rid of you?
Generally, no. They still have to follow all the normal eviction laws, which in California usually means having a valid just cause for eviction. The sources are clear it's illegal to evict someone just to turn around and rent the unit for a lot more money, trying to profit off the disaster.
I think I saw something about an executive order related to roommates.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
There was a specific protection, I think it ran until early 2025, that stopped landlords from evicting tenants. just because they took in friends or family who were displaced by a fire.
Okay. What about a scenario like the landlord's own house burned down and they want to move into your rental unit? Or maybe their displaced relative needs a place. Could that be just cause?
That's a bit more nuanced. An owner move-in or relative move-in can potentially be a valid just cause under state law, even after a disaster. However, the landlord has to follow very strict procedures.
Like what?
They have to give you proper written notice under state law. It's usually at least 60 days if you've lived there a year or more. And depending on local laws and your situation, they might even have to pay you relocation assistance.
So they can't just show up and say, I need my place back now.
Definitely not.
Yeah.
And if they don't follow the procedures perfectly, or if the owner or relative doesn't actually move in and stay for a required period, often like a year, the eviction could be deemed illegal.
So the big message here is, if you get an eviction notice after a fire, don't panic and assume it's legit. Find out your rights. Seek legal help fast.
Absolutely. Time is really critical when you get any kind of eviction notice.
Okay, linked to that idea of landlords wanting more money. What about price gouging? Can they just jack up the rent after a fire clears out housing?
No, there are specific protections against that too. California has anti-price gouging laws that kick in automatically when a state of emergency is declared.
And what do those laws say about rent?
Basically, during the declared emergency, landlords are generally prohibited from raising rent more than 10% above what it was before the emergency was declared.
Just 10% max.
Right. And that applies to existing tenants and to vacant units being advertised for new rentals. This cap usually stays in place until the official emergency declaration ends.
So any huge rent hikes right after a fire are likely illegal.
Very likely, yes. And the sources warn tenants to watch out for scams too, like a landlord claiming a unit is destroyed to get you out, then quickly fixing it and re-renting it at a massively inflated illegal price.
If you think you're seeing price gouging, who do you report it to?
You can report it to your local police department, your county's district attorney's office, or the California Attorney General's office. They handle these kinds of consumer protection issues.
Good to know. We've touched on it a lot, but let's just really underline the role of renter's insurance one more time. It seems so central.
It really is. It acts as such a crucial safety net, filling gaps where the landlord isn't responsible or where state law doesn't mandate assistance after a disaster like a fire.
So specifically, what does it cover again that's so important here?
Two main things for this situation. First, your personal belongings. Your furniture, clothes, electronics, all that stuff. Fire, smoke, soot damage your things that's typically covered. Remember, the landlord insures the building. You insure your stuff inside.
Right. And the second thing?
That loss of use or additional living expenses coverage. That's the money for temporary housing, hotels, maybe extra food costs if the fire makes your rental uninhabitable. That's often the biggest immediate financial hit for displaced renters, and insurance is designed to cover it.
So, action plan after a fire. Check on safety first, obviously. Then call your insurance company ASE. Document all your damaged stuff. Keep every single receipt for displacement costs. And actually read your policy so you know your limits and what's covered.
Exactly. Those steps will make the claims process smoother and help you get the support you're paying for.
Trying to figure all this out while you're dealing with the shock and trauma of a fire sounds overwhelming. But the sources stress that help is available, right? You don't have to navigate this alone.
Absolutely not. There are several types of resources out there for tenants.
What kind of help are we talking about?
Well, we mentioned the federal aid FEMA and the SBA for financial help with housing and replacing belongings. But for help specifically with your rights as a tenant, navigating landlord issues, the key resources are often local legal aid societies and tenant rights groups.
And what do they do? How can they help?
They usually offer free or low-cost legal advice and sometimes representation. They can explain your rights about repairs, help you communicate or negotiate with your landlord, defend you against an improper eviction, help you get your security deposit back. They know the local laws too. The sources mention groups like Legal Aid Foundation of LA, Bay Area Legal Aid, Tenants Together, Tenant Law Group. These kinds of places are invaluable.
Sounds like getting in touch with one of them early on could make a huge difference. Any state or local agencies.
Yeah, the California Department of Housing and Community Development has info and some programs. The Department of Insurance is who you contact if you run into problems with your insurance claim. And definitely check with your local city or county housing department. They'll know the specific local ordinances that apply to you.
Okay, this has been incredibly detailed. So to kind of wrap up the key actions for renters facing this, Document absolutely everything. Know that your local city or county might have stronger protections than state law. Act fast, report problems, get help quickly, and understand your renter's insurance.
Those are definitely the critical takeaways. It's really about being proactive and informed.
You know, thinking about it, it's pretty significant that these laws and resources exist. It forms a kind of safety net, doesn't it? It can't undo the fire, but it provides structure.
It really does.
Yeah.
What does it actually mean for someone who's just gone through that kind of devastation? To know there are rules about fair treatment, about their right to repairs, about getting help if they're displaced or facing eviction.
It means you're not completely powerless, right? Even when things feel totally out of control.
Exactly. Understanding these specific points, habitability, rent rules, deposit protection, relocation resources, eviction defenses, price gouging limits, it gives you leverage. It empowers you to assert your rights, to access aid, and to navigate this incredibly difficult aftermath with more agency. It shifts you from just being a victim of the fire to being an informed person who knows what they're entitled to.
That's a powerful way to think about it. Knowing your rights isn't just abstract legal knowledge, it's practical empowerment when you need it most.
Call now 714-442-9741. Thank you.